The waitress took care of an unknown elderly woman during the storm, and the lady saw her as the perfect wife for her billionaire son. Today, we're going to meet Claire and Nathaniel, two different worlds brought together by a storm. If you love fun and moving stories, go ahead and leave your like. Your support really helps our channel grow and bring more content like this. Claire Dawson held the tray with one hand and the diner door frame with the other, while the wind howled outside. The rain hammered the glass door with force. "Frank, are you sure this place isn't going to fly away?" Claire shouted over the noise, adjusting her apron stained with coffee and ketchup. From the back of the kitchen, a hoarse and irritated voice replied, "If it flies away, I'm going with it, and I'll finally get a decent vacation." Claire rolled her eyes. Frank Miller was in his early 60s, had the temperament of a grumpy bear, and zero patience for storms, complaining customers, or anything that interrupted his routine of grilling hamburgers in peace. But that night in Madison, Wisconsin, was far from an ordinary night. The storm had arrived without warning. The small roadside diner where Claire worked was running only on the emergency generator, which made a constant and irritating noise, as if it were complaining about the extra effort. The radio in the kitchen crackled between static and bad news. "Attention, residents of Madison and surrounding areas. All main roads are blocked due to flooding and fallen trees. Authorities recommend that no one leave their homes until further notice." Claire sighed and looked around. The diner was packed with stranded people, nervous and clearly not knowing what to do. "Folks, I know the situation isn't easy," Claire said loudly, forcing a smile. "But while you're here, I'll make sure nobody goes without hot coffee and apple pie." "Deal?" One of the truck drivers grumbled something that sounded like a thank you, but Claire pretended it was a warm compliment. She was about to go back to the kitchen when the diner door opened violently. The wind rushed in strong, knocking down napkins, making the plastic menus fly. And then Claire saw. Two figures came in together, fighting against the force of the wind. A tall man in a dark gray suit, completely soaked, was practically carrying an elderly woman by one arm. She was visibly shaking, her gray hair stuck to her face, her elegant clothes completely ruined by the rain. He wasn't much better off, with dark hair dripping water and an expression of tension on his face. For a second, nobody moved. The woman looked around, disoriented, and then her eyes met Claire's. "Please," the man said, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the storm. "She needs help." Claire didn't think twice. She crossed the diner in 3 long strides, took the woman by the other arm, and together they guided her to the nearest table before the door slammed again with a bang. It's okay. You're safe now," Claire said, helping the elderly woman sit down. "Frank, I need towels now." "Do I look like a luxury hotel?" Frank yelled back, but Claire heard the sound of drawers being opened in a hurry. The woman sat down slowly, still shaking. The man remained standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder in a protective gesture. Claire took off her own wool coat that was hanging behind the counter and placed it over the elderly woman's shoulders. "Take a deep breath. You're fine. You're in a safe place," Claire said, kneeling beside the chair to be at eye level with the woman. "What's your name?" The elderly woman blinked a few times as if she were coming back to reality. "Rosemary," she answered with a weak voice. "Rosemary Caldwell." "Nice to meet you, Rosemary. I'm Claire, and you just walked into the best storm shelter in all of Madison," Claire said with a wide smile. "The food is questionable, but the service is impeccable." Rosemary let out a weak laugh, which sounded half tearful. Claire then looked at the man. Up close, she could see he was younger than he had seemed at first glance, probably in his 30s. His face had strong features, a defined jaw, and eyes of a grayish blue that seemed to assess everything around with calculated precision. Even soaked and clearly tense, there was something about him that radiated authority. "And you, sir?" Claire asked. "Do you need towels too?" "I'm fine," he said dryly. "Take care of her first." Frank appeared with a stack of clean towels and threw them on the table without ceremony. "Here, and don't expect special treatment because I'm not in the mood." "Frank, your kindness touches me," Claire said, taking one of the towels and starting to dry Rosemary's hair carefully. She threw another towel to the man, who caught it in the air with quick reflexes. "You can use this one." You're dripping on my floor. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to receiving orders, but started drying his face and hair without commenting. Rosemary looked at Claire with an expression of genuine surprise. You don't even know us. Why are you doing this? Claire stopped for a second, thoughtful, and then shrugged. Because you clearly need help. And because, honestly, this night is already a mess anyway. 2 more people won't make a difference, she said, winking. Besides, you both look too elegant for someone who was walking under all that rain. What happened? The man opened his mouth to answer, but Rosemary was faster. Our car broke down. In the middle of the road, we tried to walk until we found help, but the storm got much worse very quickly. But the storm of the century decided to show up precisely today, Claire completed, shaking her head. Welcome to the unlucky club. Rosemary really smiled this time. You're very kind. No, I'm just practical, Claire said, standing up. Now let's solve this properly. First, hot coffee for both of you. Second, something hot to eat. Third, dry clothes for her. I have an old sweatshirt in my locker that will fit perfectly. It's not high fashion, but it's warm. I don't want to be a bother, Rosemary began. Rosemary, you're shaking like a leaf. It's not a bother. It's a basic necessity, Claire said firmly. She looked at the man. And you, sir, will you accept coffee? Please, he said, and there was something almost surprised in his voice, as if he weren't used to being treated so naturally. Great. Stay put there and I'll be right back. While Claire ran to get dry clothes and prepare a tray with coffee and food, the man sat in the chair next to Rosemary. How are you feeling? He asked quietly. Better, Rosemary answered, watching Claire move through the diner with efficiency. She's special. She's a waitress. Nathaniel, Rosemary said, in a tone of gentle reproach. Not everyone in the world is defined only by the position they hold. Nathaniel didn't respond, but his eyes followed Claire as she prepared the coffee with quick and precise movements. The other customers in the diner watched the scene with curiosity. The elderly couple exchanged approving looks. One of the truck drivers murmured something about good people still existing, and the mother of the children smiled for the first time that night. When Claire came back with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a gray hooded sweatshirt, sweatpants, and a pair of thick socks, she placed everything on the table with a smile. Coffee first. Then you change clothes, she instructed Rosemary. Bathroom is back there. Bring those wet clothes back and I'll put them to dry near the generator. Rosemary took the mug with both hands, absorbing the warmth, and took a long sip. This is wonderful. House secret. Cinnamon in the filter, Claire said, winking. Nathaniel took a sip of his own coffee and seemed genuinely surprised. This is really very good. You don't need to look so shocked, Claire joked. We may be a roadside diner, but our coffee is serious. Rosemary exchanged an amused look with Nathaniel and stood up slowly. I'm gonna change. I'll be right back. When she walked away, Claire began collecting the wet towels. Nathaniel watched her in silence, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her back. Have you worked here long? He asked suddenly. Claire turned around, surprised by the question. 3 years. Why? Curiosity, he said, but there was something calculated in the way he studied her. Well, if you're trying to figure out if I'm trustworthy enough to take care of your... Claire hesitated, realizing she didn't know what the relationship between them was. Sorry, what is she to you? Grandmother? Aunt? She's my mother, Nathaniel said. Claire blinked, surprised. Really? You don't look much alike. I took after my father more. I see, Claire said, although she didn't understand anything about the strange dynamic between the two. Well, you can relax. Your mother is in good hands. I'm not a serial killer disguised as a waitress. The corner of Nathaniel's mouth curved slightly. That's exactly what a serial killer would say. Claire let out a genuine laugh. Touché, but if I wanted to victimize someone, I'd choose a night with fewer witnesses. Nathaniel looked around the crowded diner and nodded. Valid point. The radio crackled again. Attention. Weather conditions have worsened significantly. No roads will be passable until at least 6 in the morning. Repeating. No one should attempt to leave until dawn. Claire and Nathaniel exchanged glances. Looks like you're going to be here for quite a while, Claire said. It looks that way, Nathaniel replied, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. 10 minutes later, Rosemary returned wearing the sweatsuit, which was too loose, but infinitely more comfortable. Her gray hair was dry and pulled back in a makeshift bun. She looked like a different person. Claire placed in front of her a bowl of vegetable soup and a generous piece of apple pie. Eat. No discussion. And me? Nathaniel asked, and there was a touch of humor in his voice. You look well fed. She looked like she was about to faint. Claire retorted, but she was smiling. But I can bring a sandwich if you want. Please. While Claire went to get the food, Rosemary leaned toward Nathaniel. I like her. You like everyone. That's not true. I don't like Henderson from the board or that boring woman from the golf club. Nathaniel almost smiled. She's different, Rosemary continued, watching Claire briefly chat with the elderly couple before returning with the sandwich. There's something special about her. She's a waitress at a roadside diner, Mother. And you're an executive who doesn't know the last time you had a genuine conversation with someone who didn't want anything from you. Rosemary gently retorted. Which one of you is really living? Nathaniel had no answer for that. The clock on the diner wall showed 11:30 at night, when the last hope that the storm would pass soon died completely. The generator coughed like a man with the flu. The windows shook with each gust of wind, and Frank was seriously considering sleeping on top of the stove because it was the only warm place in the kitchen. Claire observed the chaos around her with crossed arms and an expression that mixed tiredness with comic resignation. The elderly couple had turned 2 counter stools into makeshift beds, using coats as pillows. The 3 truck drivers were snoring in different chairs, each in a stranger position than the other. One of them was practically hanging backwards, with his mouth open, looking like a bizarre statue. The young mother had managed to put the 2 children to sleep under a table, covered with clean towels, and now rested beside them, with her head resting on her own purse. It was a scene worthy of a very, very strange Renaissance painting. This place looks like a refugee shelter, Frank grumbled, appearing beside Claire with a coffee mug in his hand. Technically it is, Claire replied, yawning. Refugees from a crazy storm. I should charge for lodging. Frank, you should charge less for the food, but here we are. He snorted, but Claire saw the corner of his mouth curving into an almost smile. Rosemary was sitting at one of the corner tables, watching everything with an amused expression. Nathaniel was beside her, but his eyes were heavy with tiredness, although he clearly fought against sleep. Claire walked over to them and sat down in the chair across from them with a dramatic sigh. Welcome to Madison's 5-star hotel, she said, gesturing to the chaotic environment. As you can see, our accommodations are top-notch. Rosemary laughed softly. I've stayed in much worse places, believe me. Really? Claire raised an eyebrow. You seem like the type of person who frequents sophisticated establishments and hotels with French names. Appearances deceive, Rosemary said with a mischievous gleam in her eyes. I grew up on a farm in rural Iowa. I've slept in a barn, I've bathed with ice-cold well water, and I've eaten canned beans for an entire week. Claire blinked, surprised. Wait, you? On a farm? Yes, me. Why the surprise? Because you have the posture of a British queen and speak as if you studied at Oxford. Rosemary laughed out loud, and the sound was genuine and contagious. Dear, life teaches many things, and one of them is that you can leave the farm, but the farm never completely leaves you. Nathaniel watched the exchange in silence, and there was something in his expression that Claire couldn't decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. And you, Nathaniel? Claire asked, turning to him. Did you also grow up on a farm? No, he said dryly. I grew up in Chicago. Urban environment, then. That explains the suit. What about my suit? Nothing, just that it seems very uncomfortable to wear during a storm. Rosemary laughed again, and Nathaniel cast a slightly irritated look at his mother. She has a point, Rosemary said. You could have chosen something more casual for dinner. It was a business meeting, Mother, not a picnic. Claire raised her eyebrows. Business meeting at 8 at night? My son doesn't know the concept of business hours, Rosemary said with a dramatic sigh. For him, work is a religion, and the office is the church. Mother, Nathaniel said in a warning tone. What? It's true. Claire observed the dynamic between the two with growing interest. There was love there, clearly, but also a subtle tension, as if they spoke slightly different languages. And you, Claire? Rosemary asked, changing the subject. How did a smart young woman full of energy end up in a diner in the middle of nowhere? Claire shrugged. Long story. Short version, plans changed, money ran out, life happened. And the long version? Nathaniel asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Claire hesitated for a moment. I was going to college. I got a partial scholarship, worked 2 jobs to pay for the rest. My mother got sick. I came back to take care of her. She got better, but the bills didn't stop coming. And here I am, 3 years later, still serving coffee and pretending I have my life under control. Rosemary frowned slightly. You didn't go back to college? Not yet, but I will, eventually. When the universe stops throwing me curveballs, Claire said, forcing a smile. Besides, the tips here are great. I made $12.35 yesterday. Nathaniel didn't laugh. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made Claire feel exposed. What did you want to study? He asked. Business administration, with a focus on nonprofit management. Why? Claire blinked, surprised by the direct question. Because I want to make a difference, and because I believe the best changes happen when competent people manage resources efficiently for causes that matter. Rosemary smiled, and there was something almost proud in her expression. You're special, Claire Dawson. You two keep saying that, but I'm still waiting for the part where you reveal you're secret recruiters for some strange organization, Claire joked. Nathaniel and Rosemary exchanged a look that Claire couldn't interpret. That's when Claire looked around again and realized the reality of the situation. Rosemary, where are you going to sleep? The elderly woman blinked. Well, I thought maybe I could stay right here, in a chair. No way, Claire said, standing up quickly. You're not going to spend the night in an uncomfortable diner chair. I have an apartment right upstairs. It's small, but it has a decent couch. You can stay there. And Nathaniel? Rosemary asked. Claire looked at him. Nathaniel was visibly exhausted, his eyes red from tiredness, but still maintained his rigid posture. He looks capable of surviving in a chair, Claire said. Besides, my apartment is tiny. There wouldn't be room for both. I'll be fine here, Nathaniel said, and there was something almost defensive in his voice. Are you sure? Rosemary asked, worried. I am. Go rest, Mother. You need it more than I do. Rosemary hesitated, but the exhaustion was evident in her eyes. All right, but if you need anything, I know where to find you. Claire went to the counter, took a key hanging from a hook, and gestured for Rosemary to follow. Let's go, before Frank realizes I'm abandoning ship. Before leaving, Rosemary leaned over and kissed Nathaniel's forehead. Get some sleep, dear. The world won't end if you rest for a few hours. Nathaniel didn't respond, but something in his expression softened slightly. Claire guided Rosemary to the narrow stairs at the back of the diner that led to the small apartment. It was a modest space, a living room with a couch and makeshift bookshelf, a tiny kitchen that looked more like a closet with a stove, and a door that led to the bedroom. Rosemary entered and looked around with genuine interest. The first thing that caught her attention was the number of books. They were stacked everywhere possible, on the bookshelf, on the floor, on the coffee table, even on top of the refrigerator. You like to read, Rosemary observed. I do. It's my way of traveling without leaving the place, Claire said, taking some pillows from the couch and arranging them more comfortably. Sorry about the mess. I wasn't expecting visitors. It's perfect, Rosemary said sincerely. She walked to the bookshelf and ran her fingers over the spines of the books. There was everything. Literary classics, novels, philosophy books, even some on business and economics. You're eclectic, Rosemary commented. I read whatever falls into my hands. The public library is my best friend. Rosemary turned around and smiled. Thank you, Claire. Really? Stop thanking me. It's getting embarrassing. They sat on the couch, and Rosemary looked out the small window of the apartment. The rain continued relentlessly. You know, I should be worried right now, Rosemary said thoughtfully. Stranded far from home without proper communication, but strangely, I feel good. It must be the charm of the old sweatshirt, Claire joked. Maybe. Or maybe it's the company. And they talked for hours. Rosemary asked questions about Claire's life, about her dreams, about what she would like to do if she could do anything in the world. Claire, in turn, asked about Rosemary's life, about her experiences, about how she saw the world. If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, Who would it be? Rosemary asked. That's easy. Eleanor Roosevelt, Claire answered without hesitation. Rosemary raised her eyebrows, impressed. Why? Because she was incredible. She fought for human rights, redefined the role of First Lady, and did it all while dealing with a complicated marriage and absurd social pressures. She's my hero. Excellent choice, Rosemary said with genuine approval. Meanwhile, at the diner, Nathaniel tried to find a comfortable position in a chair that clearly wasn't designed for sleeping. He observed the other storm refugees. The truck drivers snored in off-key harmony. The elderly couple slept embraced. The young mother had one of the children nestled in her arms. Ordinary people. Ordinary lives. And an extraordinary waitress who treated everyone with the same genuine kindness, without knowing or caring who they were or what they owned. Nathaniel closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, slept without dreaming about spreadsheets and meetings. The smell of fresh coffee invaded Claire's room before the alarm clock even went off. She opened her eyes slowly, confused, and lay there for a few seconds, trying to understand why her apartment smelled like a professional coffee shop. Then the memory of the previous night came back. The storm, the soaked pear, the makeshift couch. Rosemary. Claire jumped out of bed, wearing only an old t-shirt from a charity race she never participated in and pajama pants with a kitten print, and ran to the living room. The scene she found was so surreal that she had to blink 3 times to make sure she wasn't dreaming. Rosemary Caldwell, the woman who hours ago was shivering from cold and exhaustion, was now in Claire's tiny kitchen, completely at ease, stirring a frying pan with scrambled eggs while humming softly. She still wore the borrowed sweatshirt, but somehow managed to look elegant doing it. "Good morning, dear," Rosemary said cheerfully. "I hope you like scrambled eggs. I found cheese in the refrigerator and took the liberty of using it." Claire stood at the door, mouth agape. "You're cooking, in my kitchen." "Technically, I'm making breakfast to thank you for the hospitality," Rosemary corrected, serving the eggs on 2 plates. "Sit down, you look like someone who urgently needs caffeine." Claire obeyed automatically. "Rosemary, you didn't need to do this." "I know, but I wanted to." They sat down to eat, and Claire had to admit the eggs were delicious. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" she asked. "On the farm, remember?" Rosemary said with a smile. "My mother taught me before I could walk properly." "Your talents never stop surprising me. Dear, you haven't seen anything yet." At the diner, Nathaniel woke up with a sore neck and the certainty that he would never sleep in a plastic chair again for the rest of his life. He stretched slowly, blinking against the pale morning light coming through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind wet streets and a gray but calm sky. The other refugees were waking up too. The truck drivers complained about stiff necks, while Frank prepared fresh coffee in the kitchen, grumbling about how he was never going to let anyone sleep in his establishment again. Nathaniel looked around, confirming what he already knew. His mother had gone upstairs with Claire the previous night, and was probably still up there, sleeping comfortably, while he spent the night in a chair that seemed to have been designed to be uncomfortable. Typical of Rosemary. She always found a way to get the best part. He walked to the back of the diner and found the narrow stairs. He climbed the steps with firm strides and stopped in front of the apartment door. He knocked 3 times. Firm and decisive. The door opened, and Claire appeared, still in kitten pajamas and hair completely messy. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. "Nathaniel, good morning." "Good morning," he said, trying to maintain his composure despite the stiff neck. "Is my mother awake?" "She is, and apparently decided to take over my kitchen." "Come in." He entered the small apartment and found Rosemary sitting at the table, eating scrambled eggs with the calm of someone who had slept in a feather bed and not on a borrowed couch. "Nathaniel," she said cheerfully. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" He stared at her with a raised eyebrow. "You're kidding, right? I spent the night in a plastic chair while you were up here on a real couch, and you still ask if I slept well?" "Dear, you could have come up too. Claire offered the apartment to me. She didn't forbid you from coming. You said you'd be fine and that I should stay down there in case someone needed anything." "And did they?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to respond and then closed it, frustrated. "No, but that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Rosemary asked innocently, taking a sip of coffee. Claire watched the exchange, trying to contain her laughter. The dynamic between mother and son was fascinating to watch. The point is that you left me down there while you slept comfortably up here. Nathaniel, you're a grown man and perfectly capable of making your own decisions. If you chose to stay in an uncomfortable chair instead of looking for a better alternative, it's not my fault. What alternative? The floor? There was an upholstered bench near the window. Claire offered, trying to be helpful. Nathaniel turned to her. It was occupied by the elderly couple. Oh, true, Rosemary smiled smugly. See? There was no alternative. You did the best you could under the circumstances. Now stop complaining and come have breakfast. The eggs are delicious. Want coffee? Claire offered. Looks like you need it. Nathaniel turned to her, and for a moment the irritation on his face softened. Please. Claire poured a mug and handed it to him. Their fingers touched briefly in the exchange, and she felt a strange shiver run up her arm. Thank you, he said, and there was something different in his voice. Softer. You're welcome. Rosemary watched the two with a small, knowing smile. Nathaniel, sit down and have breakfast with us, she said. You're too tense for someone who just woke up. I have a meeting in 3 hours, he said, and you'll get there on time. The storm has passed, the roads are clearing, but first, you're going to eat something decent. Nathaniel looked at his mother, then at Claire, and then sighed. All right, but only 10 minutes. He sat at the table and Claire placed a plate of eggs in front of him without asking. Your mother made them, she explained. They're really good. Nathaniel took a forkful and seemed genuinely surprised. This is very good. I know, Rosemary said smugly. I didn't build an empire by being mediocre at anything. Claire almost choked on her coffee. Wait, empire? Rosemary cast a mischievous look at Nathaniel. Oh, you didn't tell her? It didn't come up, Nathaniel said, visibly uncomfortable. Tell me what? Claire asked, looking from one to the other. Rosemary smiled. Dear, I'm Rosemary Caldwell. I founded Caldwell Technologies 40 years ago, and Nathaniel here is the current CEO. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked at Nathaniel with new eyes. Caldwell Technologies. The company that manufactured half of the country's electronic devices. The company that was constantly in the news. The company that was worth an incalculable fortune. And then she looked at her own tiny apartment with old furniture, books stacked on the floor, and a refrigerator that made strange noises. Oh, was all she managed to say. Claire, Nathaniel began, but she interrupted him. You're a billionaire. Technically, yes. And you didn't think it was relevant to mention that? You didn't ask. Claire let out an incredulous laugh. I served coffee to a billionaire in a chipped mug and offered a ham sandwich. It was a very good sandwich, Nathaniel said, and there was a trace of humor in his voice. This isn't funny. It's a little funny. Claire stood up abruptly, crossing her arms. Look, I don't know what your game is, but I treated you and your mother like normal people, because that's what you seemed to be. People who needed help. If I had known I was dealing with... With what? Nathaniel asked, and there was something challenging in his tone. With rich people? Billionaires? Would you have treated us differently? Claire opened her mouth to respond and then closed it. Because the truth was yes. She probably would have been more formal, more distant, more conscious of every word and gesture, and that realization bothered her deeply. Rosemary stood up and held Claire's hands firmly. Dear, that's why we didn't say anything, because for the first time in a long time, someone treated us like human beings, not like walking wallets or business connections. You took care of me because I needed it, not because you expected something in return. Claire felt the lump in her throat tighten. That doesn't change the fact that you lied. We omitted. Rosemary corrected gently. It's not the same thing. It seems like the same thing to me. Nathaniel stood up too. Claire, I understand if you're upset, but my mother is right. What you did for her last night was genuine, and that's rare. Claire looked at him, studying his face. He seemed different now. Less tense, less formal, almost human. Why does this matter to you? She asked. Because, he hesitated as if choosing his words carefully, because I spend my life surrounded by people who want something from me. And you were the first person in a long time who didn't want anything. Who simply helped because you could. The silence stretched between them. Rosemary watched the exchange with a smile that Claire couldn't decipher. "We need to go," Nathaniel said finally. "I have the meeting." But he took a card from his pocket and placed it on the table. "If you need anything, call." Claire looked at the card. Nathaniel Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Technologies. "I don't need charity," she said. "It's not charity. It's gratitude," he replied. "There's a difference." Rosemary approached and hugged Claire tightly. "Thank you for everything, dear. I'll come back to visit. I promise." Claire returned the hug, feeling strangely emotional. "It was a pleasure, Rosemary. Really." They both said goodbye and went down the stairs. Claire stood at the door, watching them until they disappeared from sight. She picked up the card from the table and stared at it for a long moment. Then, instead of throwing it away, she put it in the drawer of the nightstand. Not because she planned to call, but because, somehow, that crazy night had meant something. And Claire had the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story, but rather the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. 5 days after the storm, Claire was cleaning the same table for the third time just to have something to do when the doorbells rang. She didn't even look up. It was probably Mr. Peterson coming to get his usual black coffee and complain about municipal taxes for 20 minutes straight. "Welcome to," Claire began automatically, and then froze. Rosemary Caldwell was standing at the diner entrance, wearing a beige blazer and elegant pants set, with a silk scarf around her neck and huge sunglasses that made her look like a movie star from the 50s. She was holding a very elegant leather purse, and she was smiling as if she had just won the lottery. "Surprise!" Rosemary said cheerfully, opening her arms. Frank, who was frying bacon in the kitchen, appeared at the service window with the spatula in his hand and an expression of deep distrust. "Who's that?" he asked loudly, without any social filter. "Frank, manners," Claire hissed, before turning to Rosemary with a bewildered smile. "Rosemary, what are you doing here?" "I came to visit, of course," Rosemary replied, walking to the counter as if she owned the place. "I said I'd come back, didn't I?" "Yes, but I thought you were being polite," Claire admitted. "Dear, I never say things I don't intend to follow through on," Rosemary said, sitting on one of the swivel stools and spinning like a child. "This is fun." Frank looked at Claire with an expression that clearly said, "Who's this crazy woman?" Claire just shrugged, equally lost. "Okay, so, you want coffee? Pie? A reasonable explanation for being here?" "All of the above," Rosemary answered, taking off her sunglasses. "And I want to get to know this charming establishment better. You know, during the storm I was so disoriented that I barely paid attention." "Charming is a generous word," Frank grumbled, returning to the grill. "Don't be modest," Rosemary said loudly in his direction. "This place has personality, character, history. It has a leak in the ceiling and a refrigerator that makes strange noises. But okay," Claire murmured, pouring coffee for Rosemary. What started as a quick visit turned into an entire afternoon. Rosemary didn't just stay, she settled in. She talked to every customer who came in, asking questions about their lives as if they were old friends. She praised Frank's cherry pie until he finally smiled, albeit reluctantly. She even helped Claire serve some tables, insisting she wanted to experience waitress life. "Rosemary, you don't need to do this," Claire said, laughing, when the elderly woman almost dropped an entire tray of milkshakes. "Nonsense. This is fun," Rosemary replied, balancing the tray with determination. Frank watched everything from the kitchen, shaking his head. "That woman is completely crazy," he muttered. "I heard that," Rosemary shouted cheerfully, "and I take it as a compliment." Claire couldn't stop laughing. It was in the middle of this fun chaos that the doorbells rang again, and Nathaniel Caldwell walked in. Claire felt her smile freeze on her face. He looked different, less formal. He wore dark jeans, a light blue shirt without a tie, and a leather jacket that made him look more human and less CEO. But there was still that aura of controlled tension around him. Rosemary lit up. "Nathaniel, what a wonderful coincidence." Nathaniel looked at his mother with an expression that made it clear this was no coincidence at all. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "Visiting my friend Claire, of course," Rosemary said innocently. "And you, what are you doing here?" "You sent me a message saying you were at this address and that I should come immediately because it was urgent," Nathaniel said, showing his phone. Rosemary blinked. "Did I?" How strange, it must have been a mistake. Mother? Since you're here, sit down. Claire, dear, serve coffee to my son. Claire, who was frozen holding a dish towel, finally reacted. Sure. Coffee. Coming. Nathaniel sat down reluctantly on the stool next to Rosemary, looking around the diner with poorly disguised curiosity. Claire poured the coffee with hands that trembled slightly, which was completely stupid because she served coffee to hundreds of people every day without problems. But Nathaniel Caldwell was not an ordinary person. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was softer than last time. "You're welcome," Claire replied, and then stood there like a statue, not knowing what to do. Rosemary watched the two with a mischievous and knowing smile. "Claire, why don't you sit with us?" she suggested. "It's so empty now." "I have to." Claire gestured vaguely at the diner, which was indeed empty except for a solitary customer reading a newspaper in the corner. "Nonsense. Sit down," Rosemary insisted, patting the stool on the other side. Claire looked at Frank for help, but he just shrugged and went back to the kitchen, the traitor. She sat down. The silence that followed was so awkward that Claire wanted to dig a hole in the ground and bury herself in it. "So," Rosemary began cheerfully, "I asked Claire again, and she was telling me about her plans to go back to college. Isn't that inspiring?" Nathaniel looked at Claire with genuine interest. "What do you want to study again?" "Business administration. Maybe something focused on small business management," Claire answered, feeling her face heat up. "Nothing too grand." "Small business management is the backbone of the American economy," Nathaniel said seriously. "Don't underestimate it." Claire blinked, surprised. "Wow, okay, thank you." "Nathaniel is terrible at compliments," Rosemary explained, "but he's being sincere." "Mother, please," Nathaniel said, but his lips curved slightly, and then something strange happened. They started to talk. Really talk. Rosemary conducted the conversation like a conductor, asking questions, provoking laughter, creating bridges between Claire and Nathaniel. And slowly, the atmosphere began to relax. Claire discovered that Nathaniel had a dry and unexpected sense of humor. When she made a joke about how the diner was so old it probably existed before the internet, he replied, "Considering that the commercial internet only became popular in the 90s, I'd say you're right. This place looks like it was decorated in the 70s and never updated again." "Hey," Claire protested, laughing. "I like the retro charm." "Retro charm is a very kind euphemism. You just insulted my workplace. Technically, I just made a factual observation." Frank appeared at the service window. "He's right. This place is really old." "Frank," Claire exclaimed, but she was laughing. Rosemary watched everything with poorly disguised satisfaction. The afternoon passed quickly. Customers came and went. Claire had to get up a few times to serve, but always came back to the conversation. Nathaniel, who initially seemed uncomfortable, began to visibly relax. At one point, while Claire was serving a table, Rosemary leaned toward Nathaniel and whispered, "She's special, isn't she?" Nathaniel looked at Claire, who was laughing at something a customer said, and something changed in his expression. "Yes," he admitted quietly, "she is." When Claire came back, she caught them both looking at her strangely. "What? Do I have something on my face?" "No," Nathaniel said too quickly. You're fine." Rosemary could barely hide her laughter. That's when two men in suits entered the diner, talking loudly. "Caldwell Technologies is expanding again. I read it in the newspaper today. That billionaire CEO is a genius." Claire felt her stomach sink. She looked at Nathaniel, who suddenly looked uncomfortable. And then everything fell into place. She already knew he was a CEO. Rosemary had mentioned it, but hearing strangers talk about his wealth, about his empire, made it all real in a way it hadn't been before. Claire stood up abruptly. "I need to check something in the kitchen," she said, and left before anyone could respond. Frank found her leaning against the freezer, breathing deeply. "Are you okay?" "I'm completely ridiculous," Claire murmured. "A waitress talking to a billionaire as if we were, I don't know, equals." "So what?" Frank asked, crossing his arms. "So what?" "Frank, look at me. Look at him. We're from completely different worlds." "Different worlds don't mean you're worth less," Frank said with surprising firmness. "Hold your head up, girl. You saved his mother during a storm. That's worth a lot." Claire looked at Frank, surprised by the unexpected wisdom. But when she returned to the counter, her smile was forced. Nathaniel noticed immediately. And for the first time since they met, An invisible barrier rose between them. Claire returned to the counter, still smiling, but Nathaniel immediately noticed that something had changed. The sparkle in her eyes had diminished, her posture was more rigid, and when she spoke, there was a distance that didn't exist minutes before. "Sorry for the delay," Claire said, forcing a smile. "I needed to check the inventory." Nathaniel knew it was a lie, but said nothing. Rosemary, however, was not so subtle. "Claire, dear, are you okay?" she asked, studying the waitress's face attentively. "Perfectly fine," Claire replied, cleaning the counter that was already clean. "Just tired? It's been a long week." The atmosphere had cooled considerably, and everyone felt it. Nathaniel looked at his watch and stood up reluctantly. "Mother, we need to go. You have that video conference at 5. "Oh, yes. The extremely important video conference that I completely forgot about," Rosemary said with obvious sarcasm, but stood up anyway. She walked over to Claire and held her hands firmly. "Thank you for the company, dear. As always, it was wonderful." "The pleasure was mine, Rosemary," Claire said, and her voice was genuine despite the tension. Nathaniel hesitated, clearly wanting to say something, but the words didn't come. "Thank you for the coffee," he said finally, and it sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "You're welcome," Claire replied politely, but didn't look directly at him. When they left, Frank appeared beside Claire, drying his hands on a cloth. "What happened?" "Nothing," Claire lied. "You're a terrible liar." Claire sighed, leaning on the counter. "I heard those men talking about billions of dollars in global companies, and suddenly everything became very real. You know? Nathaniel isn't just a nice guy. He's something else, something I don't understand and will never be part of." "Nonsense," Frank said simply. "It's not nonsense, Frank, it's the truth." Frank looked at her for a long moment. "You know what your problem is, Claire? You assume you're not good enough before you even try." And then he went back to the kitchen, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts. 3 days passed. Rosemary didn't return to the diner. Nathaniel didn't show up, and Claire tried to convince herself she was relieved. It was on a rainy Tuesday, while Claire was reorganizing ketchup bottles out of pure lack of things to do, that her phone vibrated. Unknown number. "Would you like to have coffee with me?" Outside the diner. "Nathaniel." Claire looked at the screen for a full 30 seconds, completely motionless. Frank, who was peeling potatoes with the patience of someone losing a fight, noticed her expression. "Who died?" "Nobody, I think," Claire replied, still processing. "Nathaniel Caldwell just invited me for coffee." Frank stopped peeling and looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "The billionaire? That's the one." "And are you going?" Claire opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't know." Was that a question or an answer? "Both." Claire threw the cloth in the sink. "Frank, this is completely outside my reality. Why would he invite me? Maybe because he likes you?" "Don't be absurd." "You're the one being absurd," Frank retorted, going back to the potatoes. "The man is clearly interested. Anyone with eyes can see it." Claire looked at her phone again, her heart beating irregularly. And then, against all her good sense, she typed. "Claire, okay, when?" The response came in less than 10 seconds. "Today at 3 p.m., I know a place." Claire took a deep breath. "All right, send me the address." When the address arrived, Claire needed to sit down. It was a boutique coffee shop in downtown Madison that she only knew because she passed by it sometimes. The kind of place where a coffee cost $8 and came with latte art. "I'm gonna need better clothes," she murmured. Frank snorted. "You're perfect just the way you are." "Frank, I work in a diner. My clothes smell like fryer grease." "Then take a shower." Claire rolled her eyes, but the advice was valid. 3 hours later, she was standing in front of the coffee shop, wearing her best jeans, a moss green blouse she saved for special occasions, and trying not to look completely terrified. Nathaniel was already there, sitting near the window, looking at his phone with a concentrated expression. He wore a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and black dress pants. He looked like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. Claire almost turned around, but then he looked up, saw her through the glass, and smiled. And that smile made her momentarily forget how to walk. She went in, the doorbell announcing her arrival. "Claire," Nathaniel said, standing up immediately. "You came." "You seem surprised," Claire replied, sitting in the chair across from him. "Not surprised, just relieved," Nathaniel admitted, and there was something vulnerable in his voice. A waiter appeared almost instantly, all professional smiles. "What will you have today?" "An Americano, please," Nathaniel said. "A cappuccino," Claire ordered, and then hesitated. "The small one." "You can order the large," Nathaniel offered. "I'm paying. I know you're paying. But I want the small one," Claire replied, looking directly at him. Nathaniel blinked, surprised, and then smiled. "All right, small it is then." When the waiter walked away, a strange silence settled in. Claire looked around. The coffee shop was beautiful. Hanging plants, soft lighting, light wood furniture. There was a couple in the corner whispering romantically. 3 women laughing at a larger table. A man alone working on a laptop. Everyone seemed perfectly at ease. Claire felt like an imposter. "So," Nathaniel began and then stopped. "So," Claire echoed. More silence. And then both spoke at the same time. "Why did you invite me?" "I wanted to thank you." They stopped, laughed nervously. "You first," Nathaniel offered. "I was going to ask why you invited me for coffee." Claire said honestly, "Because this is kind of strange, isn't it?" Nathaniel ran his hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "I wanted to get to know you better. Outside the diner, without my mother orchestrating everything as if we were in a theater play." Claire couldn't help but laugh. "She's pretty obvious, isn't she?" "Extremely," Nathaniel agreed, and there was relief in his voice. "Sorry about that. She has good intentions, but zero subtlety." "I like her," Claire said sincerely. "She's fun." "Fun is a generous word," Nathaniel murmured, but he was smiling. The coffees arrived. Claire took a sip and closed her eyes for a second. "Okay, I understand why this coffee costs $8, she admitted. "Wait, how much?" Nathaniel seemed genuinely shocked. $8 for the small one." He looked at his own coffee as if seeing it for the first time. "I really have no idea how much things cost, do I?" "Apparently not," Claire said, but she was smiling. "In your world, coffee probably appears magically whenever you need it." "Pretty much. At the office, it's unlimited and free. I just drink it. Never thought about the price. Must be nice to live like that." Nathaniel looked at her, and there was something serious in his eyes. "Sometimes it's lonely." The raw honesty of the statement caught Claire off guard. "What do you mean?" "You never know if people like you or your bank account," Nathaniel said simply. "It becomes hard to trust." Claire processed that for a moment. "That must be horrible." "It is," he admitted. "That's why my mother was so impressed with you. You helped her without having any idea who she was, without wanting anything in return." "I just did what any decent person would do." "Exactly," Nathaniel said. "And that's the difference." They talked for over an hour, and surprisingly, the conversation flowed. Nathaniel asked questions about her life, about her dreams, about what made her happy. Claire found herself talking about things she rarely shared, about wanting to go back to college, about the fear of being stuck at the diner forever. Nathaniel, in turn, talked about the pressure of leading a giant company, about endless meetings in different cities, about traveling so much that sometimes he woke up without remembering where he was. "Last week I had meetings in Seattle on Monday, Dallas on Tuesday, and Boston on Wednesday," he said, stirring his coffee. "I got home on Thursday and literally forgot if I had fed my fish." "You have a fish?" "Had. Now I have an empty aquarium and a lot of guilt." Claire laughed so hard she almost spilled her cappuccino. "You just admitted fish negligence to a stranger?" "You're not a stranger," Nathaniel said, and there was sincerity in his voice. "Not anymore." Claire felt her face heat up. That's when Nathaniel's phone vibrated insistently on the table. He looked at the screen and sighed. "Sorry. It's from work. I need to answer quickly." "That's fine," Claire said. Nathaniel stood up and walked near the door, speaking quietly. Claire sat observing the coffee shop, feeling a strange mix of happiness and discomfort. That's when a voice startled her. "You must be Claire." She turned abruptly. A man in a dark gray suit was standing beside the table, holding a leather folder. He was about 40 years old, hair perfectly gelled back, and a smile that seemed too practiced. Yes, that's me," Claire replied, confused. "And you are?" "Marcus Peterson, Director of Operations at Caldwell Technologies," he said, extending his hand with exaggerated formality. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Claire shook his hand, feeling a shiver of discomfort. "Finally?" "Rosemary mentioned you a few times in recent meetings," Marcus said. sitting in the empty chair without being invited. It's admirable, really, what you did during the storm. I just helped someone who needed it, Claire said, feeling strangely defensive. Of course, Marcus agreed, but there was something calculating in his eyes, and now you and Nathaniel are getting closer. It wasn't a question. It was a loaded observation. We're just having coffee, Claire replied coldly. Yes, coffee, Marcus repeated, as if the word had another meaning. It's interesting how connections can arise from the most unexpected circumstances, don't you think? Claire frowned. What exactly are you trying to say? Nothing much, Marcus said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Just that Madison is a small town, and the Caldwell family is, well, quite well known. People notice things. They talk. There was a subtle threat in his words. I don't know what you're implying, but I didn't like it, Claire said directly. Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. No implications, just friendly advice. Nathaniel's world is complicated, full of expectations and responsibilities that someone from the outside might not fully understand. Claire felt as if she'd been slapped. Someone from the outside, she repeated slowly. No offense, Marcus said quickly, but the offense had already been made. I just think it's important to have clarity about certain differences. Before Claire could respond, Nathaniel returned, putting away his phone. Marcus, he said, and his voice was icy. What are you doing here? Casual encounter, Marcus said, standing up smoothly. I stopped by for coffee and happened to recognize you. Took the opportunity to meet your friend. The pause before friend was deliberate and cruel. How convenient, Nathaniel said, clearly not believing it. If you don't mind, we're in the middle of a conversation. Of course, Marcus said, picking up his folder. It was a pleasure, Claire. I'm sure we'll see each other again. And then he left, leaving a heavy silence. Nathaniel sat down, observing Claire with concern. What did he say to you? Nothing important, Claire lied, but her voice was tense. Claire, really, it was nothing, she interrupted, grabbing her purse. Look, I need to go. Frank must be needing help at the diner. You barely finished your coffee, Nathaniel protested. I know, sorry, I just need to go, Claire said, standing up. Nathaniel stood up too, visibly worried. Did I say something wrong? No, you were great, Claire said, and it was true. Thanks for the coffee. Claire, wait. But she was already leaving, the doorbell ringing behind her. Nathaniel stood there, watching her leave through the window with a growing feeling that something precious was slipping through his fingers. And Marcus Peterson, sitting in his car across the street, watched it all with a satisfied smile. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Marcus Peterson entered Nathaniel's office without knocking, carrying a folder and an expression of concern too rehearsed to be genuine. Nathaniel was reviewing financial reports, trying to concentrate, but the last 3 days had been a losing battle against thoughts about Claire and the abrupt way she had left the coffee shop. We need to talk, Marcus said, closing the door behind him. Good morning to you too, Marcus, Nathaniel replied without looking up from the papers. Come in without asking permission. Make yourself at home. This is serious. Marcus ignored the sarcasm, placing the folder on the desk. I have information you need to see. Nathaniel finally looked up, irritated. What information? Marcus opened the folder and spread out some printed documents. They were pages from social media, articles from local gossip sites, and even grainy photos taken from a distance. Photos of Nathaniel and Claire at the coffee shop. What is this? Nathaniel asked, his voice dangerously low. Your date with the waitress became a topic, Marcus said, pointing to one of the articles. Look at this headline. Billionaire heir of Caldwell Technologies seen with local diner employee. Romance or opportunity? Nathaniel felt anger rising. You're bringing me internet gossip? It's not just gossip, Marcus insisted. People are asking questions. Shareholders are noticing. Your personal life affects the company's image, Nathaniel. You know that. My personal life is none of your business. It becomes my business when it affects the business, Marcus retorted. Look, I'm not saying she's a bad person, but you need to consider appearances. A waitress with no background, no connections, suddenly close to the Caldwell family? People will speculate. Speculate what, exactly? Marcus shrugged, but his eyes were calculating. That maybe she sees an opportunity. You're an obvious target, Nathaniel. Rich, single, influential. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to get close out of interest. Nathaniel fell silent, processing. And in that silence, the seed of doubt began to germinate. 2 days later, Rosemary marched into her son's office with the determination of someone about to declare war. "Nathaniel James Caldwell," she said, and the use of his full name was always a bad sign. "What's going on?" Nathaniel was signing contracts, but stopped immediately. "Good morning, Mother. I'm happy to see you too." "Don't joke with me," Rosemary said, sitting in the chair across from him and crossing her arms. "You canceled lunch with Claire yesterday." Without a decent explanation. "I had a last-minute meeting." "Horrible lie," Rosemary cut him off. "I checked your schedule. You were free." Nathaniel sighed. "Mother, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" "People are talking, making assumptions about Claire and me, and I need to be careful with." "With what?" Rosemary asked, her voice becoming dangerously calm. "With being happy? With meeting someone genuine for the first time in years? With protecting the company?" Nathaniel said firmly. Rosemary looked at him for a long moment and then shook her head with disappointment. "You're listening to Marcus Peterson, aren't you?" Nathaniel's silence was answer enough. "My son," Rosemary said, standing up. "I built this company from scratch. I faced men who tried to bring me down in every possible way. And you know how I survived? By trusting my instinct. Not corporate politicians like Marcus. Marcus is protecting the company's interests." "Marcus is protecting his own interests," Rosemary cut him off. "And if you can't see that, then I failed as a mother." And then she left, leaving Nathaniel alone with his confused thoughts. Meanwhile, at the diner, Claire was having a terrible week. Frank immediately noticed something was wrong. Claire was quieter, her smile was forced, and she had dropped 3 plates in 2 days, which was completely out of the ordinary. "Okay, spill it," Frank said while she cleaned up spilled coffee for the 3rd time that morning. "There's nothing to spill," Claire replied, scrubbing the counter with unnecessary violence. "You're murdering that counter. Something's wrong." Claire stopped, put down the cloth, and sighed. "Nathaniel canceled our lunch yesterday. He sent a message saying something last minute came up. No further explanation. And nothing. It's just strange. Since that meeting at the coffee shop, he's been different, more distant, like he's pulling away on purpose." Frank crossed his arms thoughtful. "Maybe he really did have an emergency?" "Maybe," Claire said, but didn't believe it. "Or maybe that Marcus was right. Maybe I really am from too different a world, and Nathaniel finally realized it." "Or maybe you're inventing problems that don't exist," Frank retorted. "Claire, you have the terrible habit of assuming the worst." "It's not assuming when it's obvious, Frank." Before Frank could respond, the doorbells rang. But it wasn't Nathaniel. It was Rosemary. And she looked extremely determined. "Claire, dear," Rosemary said, walking directly to the counter. "We need to talk." Claire blinked, surprised. "Rosemary, what are you doing here?" "Saving my son from his own stupidity," Rosemary replied, sitting on one of the swivel stools. "And possibly also saving you from overthinking." Frank appeared with coffee without being asked. "This is going to be good," he murmured, handing the mug to Rosemary. "Thank you, Frank. You're a treasure," Rosemary said, taking a sip. "Now, Claire, my son is being a complete fool." Okay?" Claire didn't know how to respond. "He's listening to the wrong people, asking the wrong questions, and basically sabotaging his own happiness," Rosemary continued. "And I came here to tell you that you shouldn't give up on him yet." "I'm not giving up on anyone," Claire protested. "We're not even, there's nothing to give up on." Rosemary gave a knowing smile. "Dear, I wasn't born yesterday. I see how you two look at each other, and I also see my son fighting against his own heart because of fear." "Fear of what?" "Of trusting. Of being used. Of making the wrong decision," Rosemary said simply. "When you grow up in his world, everyone wants something from you. It's hard to believe that someone can like you just for who you are." Claire felt a tightness in her chest. "I never wanted anything from him." "I know, and deep down, he knows it too," Rosemary said, taking Claire's hand. "But sometimes people need time to remember what really matters." Frank, who was pretending to wash dishes but clearly listening to everything, decided to intervene. Translation: "The boy is scared and is acting like a fool." "Exactly," Rosemary agreed, smiling. Claire didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the following days, Nathaniel and Claire barely spoke. he sent a few short messages. She responded politely, but the emotional distance grew like an abyss. Frank made sarcastic comments about soap opera drama, which at least brought some smiles from Claire. And while all this was happening, Marcus Peterson worked quietly behind the scenes. He planted doubts in meetings, made subtle comments about personal distractions affecting professional focus, prepared documents for a bigger move within the company. Rosemary watched it all with growing concern, knowing that checkmate was approaching. And then, on a rainy Thursday, Claire's phone rang. It was Nathaniel, but he wasn't calling to schedule coffee. He was canceling the dinner they had planned for Friday without a real explanation. Claire listened to the vague excuse, thanked him politely, and hung up. And for the first time since she met Nathaniel Caldwell, she allowed herself to cry. Meanwhile, at the Caldwell Technologies office, Marcus smiled at his own reflection in the window. Everything was going exactly as planned. Nathaniel was signing the 10th contract of the morning when he realized he hadn't read any of them. His mind was elsewhere, specifically, stuck on the memory of the hurt tone in Claire's voice when he canceled dinner for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Marcus entered the office without warning, as he had developed the terrible habit of doing. "We have a problem," he announced, throwing a stack of reports on Nathaniel's desk. "Good morning, Marcus. What a pleasure to see you." "Yes, you may come in," Nathaniel said with tired sarcasm. "I'm not joking," Marcus insisted, pointing to the numbers. "The investors are uneasy. They think you're distracted." Nathaniel looked at the reports. They were financial projections, but something seemed wrong. "These numbers don't match what the finance department gave me last week." "Because the situation changed," Marcus said quickly, "and it needs your full attention. I can't lead alone if your head is somewhere else." There was a subtle threat there. Nathaniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I'm here. Focused." "Great," Marcus said, smiling, "because we need to make important decisions, today." Meanwhile, at the diner, Rosemary was executing her own mission. She came in like an elegant hurricane, dragging Claire by the hand before the waitress could protest. "Rosemary, what are you doing?" Claire asked as she was practically kidnapped to a corner table. "Intervention," Rosemary declared, sitting down and gesturing for Claire to do the same. "Sit, now." Claire obeyed, mainly because 3 customers were watching. "Rosemary?" "Now." "Let me talk first," Rosemary cut her off. "My son is being a complete emotional coward. You're clearly unhappy, and I'm tired of watching you two dance around the obvious." Frank appeared with coffee without being asked. "This is going to be good," he murmured, handing out the mugs. "Frank, you're my spirit animal," Rosemary said, taking a sip. "Now, Claire, when was the last time you really talked to Nathaniel?" "We talk." 3-word text messages don't count, Claire sighed. "He's busy, Rosemary. Important work, responsibilities. I understand." "Nonsense," Rosemary said without beating around the bush. "He's hiding." "From me?" "From himself," Rosemary corrected. "Nathaniel inherited my intelligence and business sense, but unfortunately, he also inherited his father's tendency to self-sabotage when things get emotionally complicated." "I don't know what you want me to do," Claire admitted, feeling her eyes burn. "Every time I try to get closer, he pulls back. It's like trying to hug an ice statue." Frank, who was pretending to clean the counter but clearly listening to everything, commented, "Technically, if you hug ice long enough, it melts." "Thanks for the physics, Frank," Claire said, but was almost smiling. "You're welcome. I charge $50 for consultation." Rosemary laughed, but her gaze remained serious when she turned back to Claire. "You like him, don't you?" Claire was quiet for so long that the answer was obvious. "Yes," she finally admitted, "but I don't know if that matters." "It matters," Rosemary said firmly, "but you need to confront him, today. No beating around the bush." "Rosemary, I can't just show up at his office." "Why not?" Rosemary asked, taking out her purse and removing a key card. "Here, direct access to the executive floor. He has a meeting at 5. Show up at 4:45. Let me take care of the rest." Claire looked at the card as if it were a grenade. "This is completely insane." "That's exactly why it will work," Rosemary said, winking. Frank leaned over the counter. "I'd love to disagree, but honestly, the idea is brilliant." At 4:40 in the afternoon, Claire was standing in front of the Caldwell Technologies building, holding the key card and questioning all her life choices. The lobby was absurdly luxurious. Marble floor, decorative fountains, and receptionists who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Claire looked at her own clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, and felt completely out of place. But Rosemary's voice echoed in her mind. Confront him. Today. She swiped the card at the elevator and pressed the button for the 25th floor. When the doors opened, she almost had a heart attack. Marcus Peterson was standing right there, holding a folder and looking at her with poorly disguised surprise. Claire, he said, and his tone was anything but friendly. What a surprise. I came to see Nathaniel, Claire said, lifting her chin. He's in a meeting. I can wait. Marcus studied her for a moment and then smiled in a way that made Claire's stomach turn. Of course, make yourself comfortable. He walked away, but Claire saw when he took out his phone and started typing quickly. 5 minutes later, Nathaniel appeared in the hallway, visibly tense. Claire, what are you doing here? It wasn't exactly the warm reception she had hoped for. We need to talk, Claire said, trying to sound confident. Nathaniel looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the curious looks from employees. Now isn't a good time. Nathaniel, it's been 2 weeks since it's been a good time. Claire cut him off, frustration finally exploding. You avoid me, cancel meetings, barely respond to messages. If you changed your mind about whatever is happening between us, just say it. The hallway became deathly silent. Several employees stopped pretending they weren't listening. Nathaniel ran his hand through his hair, visibly conflicted. Claire, it's complicated. Stop saying that, Claire exploded. Everything is complicated for you. Work, family, even having coffee. But you know what shouldn't be complicated? Being honest with someone. Nathaniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out, and in that painful silence, Claire had her answer. All right, she said quietly, feeling tears threaten. I understand. Claire, wait. No, she cut him off, backing away. You don't need to. You made it clear. She turned and walked quickly to the elevator, ignoring Nathaniel calling her name. When the elevator doors closed, she finally let the tears fall. Nathaniel stood in the hallway, surrounded by embarrassed employees, feeling as if he had just lost something precious. Marcus watched from afar, satisfied. Later that night, Rosemary entered Nathaniel's apartment without warning, using the emergency key he always forgot she had. Mother, I'm not in the mood. I don't care, Rosemary said, throwing her purse on the couch. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, and we're going to talk about it. I don't want to talk. And I don't care what you want, Rosemary retorted. Claire showed up at your office today, vulnerable, brave, honest, and you dismissed her like she was an inconvenient meeting. Nathaniel closed his eyes. I was confused, Marcus said. Marcus said, Rosemary repeated with disdain. Nathaniel, when are you going to stop letting mediocre men dictate your life? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Rosemary cut him off. You're afraid. Afraid to trust, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to be happy. And you know what that fear is doing? Destroying the best thing that's happened to you in years. Nathaniel sank into the couch, putting his head in his hands. What if she's really only interested in the money? What if Marcus is right? Rosemary sat beside him and held his face firmly, forcing him to look at her. Son, Claire took care of me during a storm without having any idea who I was. She could have called the authorities and gone on with her night, but she didn't. She gave me food, clothes, and her own apartment, without asking for anything, without expecting a reward. Tears began to stream down Nathaniel's face. I ruined everything, didn't I? Yes, Rosemary said honestly. But there's still time to fix it, if you have the courage. Meanwhile, at the diner, Claire was throwing practically all her clothes into an old suitcase. Frank watched from the apartment doorway. Are you sure about this? I need a few days away, Frank, Claire said without looking at him. I can't stand being here right now. And where are you going? My cousin lives in Chicago. I'm going to visit her. Clear my head. Frank sighed. For how long? Claire finally stopped and looked at him. I don't know. Maybe forever. And as she closed the suitcase, Marcus Peterson finally executed his decisive move at Caldwell Technologies. A move that would change everything. Claire's suitcase sat against the apartment wall for 3 days before she finally admitted to herself that she wasn't going to Chicago. Not because she didn't want to, but because running away seemed too cowardly. Instead, she did something worse. Buried everything in work. Frank noticed the change immediately. Claire was more efficient, faster, and infinitely more sarcastic. "Your coffee, Mr. Peterson," she told a regular customer, placing the mug in front of him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Served with all the genuine joy I can muster on this wonderful morning." The customer blinked, confused. Frank appeared beside her as soon as the man left. "You're scaring the customers." "I'm being efficient," Claire corrected, cleaning the counter with unnecessary violence. "You're being aggressively polite. It's disturbing." "Great, it matches my mood." Frank sighed but didn't insist. He knew Claire well enough to know when to give space. The problem was that space wasn't helping. Every time the doorbells rang, Claire automatically looked, and every time it wasn't Nathaniel, something inside her died a little more. He hadn't shown up at the diner in 6 days. 6 days since the disaster at the office. 6 days of unanswered messages. 6 days of deafening silence. "He's not coming?" Claire murmured to herself, pouring coffee into an already full mug and spilling it on the table. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Frank grumbled, throwing a cloth to her. "Go home, take the day off. You're a mess." "I'm fine." "You're far from fine. And you're starting to get dangerous around hot liquids." Claire was about to protest when her phone vibrated. An event notification on the calendar that she didn't even remember adding. Annual Caldwell Technologies Charity Gala, today at 7 p.m. Rosemary had added it months ago, when things were still different. Claire looked at the notification for a long moment, and then deleted it. She definitely wasn't going. At 7:15 in the evening, Claire was standing in front of the Grand Madison Hotel, wearing the only semi-decent dress she owned and wondering why she had come. The answer was simple and pathetic. A part of her still hoped that seeing him again would change something. The hotel lobby was intimidating. Crystal chandeliers, people in tuxedos and designer dresses, and a level of wealth that made Claire feel like she had entered the wrong place. She almost turned around 3 times before finally going in. The main ballroom was even worse. Elegantly decorated tables, live orchestra, and conversations about investments and corporate mergers that might as well have been in another language. Claire grabbed a champagne glass from a passing waiter just to have something to hold and tried to blend in with the wall. "Claire," she turned and saw Rosemary walking toward her, wearing a stunning dark blue dress and a huge smile. "You came," Rosemary said, hugging her. "I was hoping you'd come." "I almost didn't come," Claire admitted. "But you did, and that's what matters," Rosemary said, holding her arm. "Come, there are people I want you to meet." "Rosemary, I really don't think." But Rosemary was already dragging her through the crowd. Claire was introduced to executives, shareholders, and people with titles so complicated that she stopped trying to memorize them after the third one. Everyone was polite. Excessively polite. The kind of politeness that had a wall of ice underneath. "And what do you do, Claire?" A woman in a red dress asked, smiling in a way that showed all her teeth. "I work at a diner," Claire answered honestly. The silence that followed was brutal. "Oh, how interesting," the woman said, and then found an excuse to leave. Claire took a large sip of champagne. "This is going well," she murmured. "Ignore those people," Rosemary said quietly. "They have money, but zero personality." "Rosemary, I clearly don't belong here," Claire said, looking around. "Look at me. Look at them. We're from different planets." "Complete nonsense," Rosemary began, but was interrupted when someone called her name from across the ballroom. "Give me a second, dear," she said, squeezing Claire's arm before walking away. And then Claire was alone. In a sea of people who clearly saw her as an intruder. She was seriously considering escaping through the bathroom when she saw him. Nathaniel was on the other side of the ballroom, surrounded by executives, wearing a tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. He was smiling politely at something someone said, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. And then he looked up, and his eyes met hers. For a second, the entire world stopped. Claire saw surprise, regret, and something that looked desperately like longing pass across his face. He took a step toward her, and Claire panicked. She turned and walked quickly toward the exit, placing the empty glass on a table as she passed. "Claire." She heard Nathaniel calling, but didn't stop. She crossed the lobby, went through the revolving doors, and was going down the steps when a hand grabbed her arm. "Claire, please, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "Let go of me, Nathaniel." "Not until you hear me out," he said, his voice desperate. Claire finally turned around, and the anger that had been contained for days finally exploded. "Hear you out? You want me to hear you out?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Where was this desire to talk when I showed up at your office? When I sent you messages? When I called you?" I know, and I'm sorry." "You're sorry," Claire repeated without humor. "Nathaniel, you made me feel like I had imagined everything, like what was growing between us was just in my head." "It wasn't. It isn't," he said firmly. "Claire, I was confused, afraid. People were talking, making insinuations, and I believed them," Claire completed. "You believed I might only be interested in your money." Nathaniel fell silent, and the silence was confirmation enough. Claire felt the tears burn but refused to let them fall. Not there. Not in front of him. "I saved your mother during a storm because it was the right thing to do," she said quietly. "I talked to you because you seemed lonely. I liked you because you were kind and funny and real when you let your guard down. At no point did it cross my mind how much money you had. I know that now." "Now," Claire cut him off. "But not when it mattered." She stepped back, putting physical distance between them. "I don't belong in your world, Nathaniel, and clearly you don't trust me enough to make this work. So let's stop pretending." "Claire, don't." But she was already going down the rest of the steps. Nathaniel stood there, watching her leave for the second time in a week, feeling as if his heart were being ripped from his chest. He was about to go after her when his phone rang. "Marcus." "Nathaniel, I need you here. Now. We have a situation with the shareholders. It's urgent." Nathaniel looked at Claire disappearing around the corner, and then at the hotel, and made the mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He went back inside. When he arrived at the improvised meeting room, Marcus was there with 3 board members. "What's going on?" Nathaniel asked. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Change of leadership," he said simply, "effective immediately." And Nathaniel realized too late that he had fallen right into the trap. The meeting room was too quiet, the kind of silence that precedes disasters. Nathaniel looked at the 3 board members sitting at the table, all avoiding his gaze, and then at Marcus, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and an expression that pretended concern. "Does someone want to explain to me what's going on?" Nathaniel asked, keeping his voice controlled despite the alarm ringing in his head. Richard Hartley, the oldest board member, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Nathaniel, we have some concerns about the company's recent direction." "What concerns?" Marcus stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "Erratic decisions, lack of focus, missed meetings. The numbers show that your attention is divided." Nathaniel picked up the folder and flipped through it quickly. They were reports he had never seen. Charts that didn't match the real data, and notes about meetings he had attended, but that were marked as absences. "This is wrong," Nathaniel said, throwing the folder back on the table. "Half this information is distorted. Or you're so distracted you didn't notice the problems," Marcus suggested calmly. "Marcus, what exactly are you trying to do here?" Before Marcus could answer, the door opened forcefully. Rosemary entered like an elegant hurricane, her eyes shining with controlled fury. "Interesting meeting," she said, closing the door behind her, "especially considering no one told me about it." "Rosemary, this is a board matter," Richard began. "I founded this company." Rosemary cut him off, her voice like ice. "There's no board meeting that isn't my business." She walked to the table and picked up the folder that Nathaniel had thrown. She flipped through it for exactly 10 seconds before laughing. But it wasn't an amused laugh. "Marcus, do you really think I'm so senile that I wouldn't recognize data manipulation when I see it?" Marcus paled slightly, but maintained his composure. "Rosemary, with all respect, these are facts." "Facts," Rosemary repeated, turning to the board members. "Gentlemen, did you verify this information independently? Or did you simply believe what Marcus presented?" The silence was revealing. Rosemary sighed, putting the folder back on the table. "Meeting adjourned. All of you leave. Except Marcus." "Rosemary, we can't just—" Richard protested. "Leave," Rosemary repeated, and there was steel in her voice. Now. The 3 board members left quickly, clearly relieved to escape. When the door closed, Rosemary turned to Marcus with an expression that could freeze lava. "How long did you think you could fool everyone?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult me," Rosemary cut him off. "You've been planting doubts about my son for weeks, manipulating data, creating false narratives. And why? Ambition? Power?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, the mask of humility finally falling. "Someone needs to lead this company properly. Nathaniel is clearly distracted with other things." "You mean with Claire?" Rosemary said directly. "An unqualified waitress who appeared out of nowhere and suddenly is at the center of his personal life?" "Yes, that concerns me." Nathaniel took a step forward, anger finally exploding. "Claire saved my mother, without asking for anything, without knowing who we were, and you turned that into something dirty." "I protected the company's interests," Marcus retorted. "No," Rosemary said calmly. "You protected your own interests, and in the process you almost destroyed something genuine." She walked to the door and opened it. "You're fired, Marcus, effective immediately. Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. Marcus turned red. "You can't do this. I have contracts, which include clauses for misconduct and manipulation of corporate information," Rosemary said. "Read the fine print. Now leave before I make this even more unpleasant." Marcus looked at Nathaniel, expecting some kind of defense, but found only contempt. He left, slamming the door. Rosemary sighed deeply and sat in one of the chairs, suddenly looking tired. "Mother," Nathaniel began. "You ruined everything with Claire," Rosemary said without beating around the bush. "Completely." "I know. She showed up today, wearing a dress that's probably the only one she owns, surrounded by people who made her feel inadequate, and still she came. Do you know why?" Nathaniel was quiet. "For you," Rosemary answered, "because despite everything she still had hope. I tried to talk to her." "And then you came back to the staged meeting instead of going after her," Rosemary completed. "Nathaniel, you chose the company over her, again." The words hit like a punch. "What do I do now?" Rosemary stood up, picking up her purse. "You decide what really matters, because this time there might not be another chance." Meanwhile, Claire was at the diner, even though it was almost midnight. Frank found her sitting alone at a corner table, still wearing the dress, with red eyes. "You should be home," he said gently. "I don't want to be alone," Claire admitted. Frank sat down across from her. "Want to talk about it?" "There's nothing to talk about. It ended before it really even began." "Claire, I'm a waitress, Frank. He's a billionaire." "This story was never going to work," she said, wiping her eyes. "I was foolish to believe it could." "You're not foolish. You're brave," Frank corrected. "But he's a coward." Claire laughed sadly. "Maybe we both are." The next day, Claire made a decision. She looked for Frank before the shift started. "I need a week off," she said. "I'm going to Chicago to visit my cousin, for real this time." Frank studied her face for a long moment. "Are you coming back?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe it's time to start somewhere else. Start over." "Claire," eased Frank. "I just need time to think." Frank sighed, but nodded. "All right. 1 week. But you're coming back. This place isn't the same without you." Claire hugged him, grateful. And that afternoon, with a small suitcase and a broken heart, she took the bus to Chicago, not knowing that Nathaniel was, at that exact moment, running to the diner to apologize. When he arrived, breathless and desperate, Frank was cleaning the counter. "Where's Claire?" Nathaniel asked immediately. Frank looked at him with an indecipherable expression. "She left." Nathaniel felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Left to where?" he asked, his voice coming out louder than intended. Frank continued cleaning the counter with slow and deliberate movements, clearly making Nathaniel suffer on purpose. "Chicago, visiting her cousin." "For how long?" "She said a week," Frank replied, finally looking at Nathaniel. "But honestly, I don't think she's sure if she's coming back." Nathaniel ran his hands over his face, frustration and regret hitting like waves. "I ruined everything." "Yes, you did," Frank agreed without mercy. "The most genuine girl you've ever met, and you treated her like she was a threat." "I know that now." "Now," Frank repeated, throwing the cloth in the sink. "Everyone always knows after. The trick is knowing before you lose the person." Nathaniel sat on one of the counter stools, completely defeated. "How do I fix this?" Frank studied him for a long moment. Do you really like her, or do you just have a guilty conscience? Nathaniel stopped, forcing himself to be honest. I wake up thinking about her. I spend the whole day waiting for an excuse to see her. And when I'm with her for the first time in years, I feel real. Like I can just be me, without all the pressure and expectations. Frank nodded slowly. Then you have your answer. Now you need to decide if you're going to fight for it or give up like a coward. Before Nathaniel could respond, his phone rang. It was his assistant. Mr. Caldwell, your mother has called an emergency board meeting. All members must attend in 30 minutes. She said it's urgent. Nathaniel hung up and looked at Frank. I need to go, but when Claire comes back, can you tell her I need to talk to her? If she comes back, Frank corrected, and if she does, she decides whether she wants to talk to you or not. Nathaniel nodded, knowing he deserved every word. 30 minutes later, he entered the Caldwell Technologies meeting room and found a scenario he didn't expect. Rosemary was sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by the 7 board members, and at the other end, visibly nervous, was Marcus Peterson. Mother, what's going on? Nathaniel asked. Sit down, Rosemary said simply. It's time for some truths to come to light. Nathaniel sat down, confused. Rosemary stood up, picking up a remote control and turning on the projector. The first image that appeared was an email from Marcus to one of the board members. Subject, Leadership Concerns. Nathaniel is clearly distracted with personal matters. I suggest we start considering leadership alternatives before this affects quarterly results. This email was sent 3 weeks ago, Rosemary said calmly, 2 days after Marcus met Claire for the first time. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was just expressing legitimate concerns. Legitimate concerns? Rosemary repeated, changing the slide. The next image showed financial spreadsheets, 2 versions side by side. On the left, the real numbers from the finance department. On the right, the numbers Marcus presented at yesterday's meeting. Nathaniel looked closer. The differences were glaring. Marcus's version showed drops that didn't exist, pessimistic projections that had no basis in reality. You falsified financial data, Nathaniel said, looking at Marcus with disbelief. I adjusted the projections to reflect possible risks, Marcus began. You lied, Rosemary cut him off. And that wasn't all. Another slide, screenshots of conversations, Marcus talking to journalists from gossip sites, planting stories about Nathaniel and Claire, suggesting she was an opportunist. You fed the press, Nathaniel said, anger growing in his voice. You created this whole narrative. I protected the company's image. You manipulated events for your own benefit, Rosemary said, her voice sharp as glass. Because you saw an opportunity. Nathaniel, distracted, meant an opening for you to take control. Marcus fell silent, realizing there was no way out. Richard Hartley, from the board, cleared his throat. Rosemary, these are serious accusations. Do you have concrete proof? Rosemary smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. I built this company from scratch at a time when women were barely taken seriously in business meetings. Do you really think I don't know how to document every move? She threw a thick folder on the table. Emails, text messages, call records, even conversation recordings, all obtained legally through the internal compliance department. Marcus signed a consent form when he was hired, allowing monitoring of corporate communications for security purposes. Marcus was visibly pale now. You can't. I have rights. And we have better lawyers, Rosemary said simply. But I'll give you a choice, Marcus. You resign now, sign a confidentiality agreement, and leave with some dignity. Or I make all this public and you never work in technology again. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus looked around, seeking support, but all the board members avoided his gaze. I resign, he said finally, his voice barely coming out. Excellent, Rosemary said, pushing documents toward him. Sign here. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. Marcus signed with trembling hands and left, escorted by 2 security guards who appeared magically at the door. When he was gone, Rosemary turned to the board members. Does anyone else have concerns about my son's leadership? Silence. Excellent. Meeting adjourned. Everyone left quickly, except Nathaniel. He stayed seated, processing everything that had just happened. Mother, why didn't you tell me you were investigating? Because you needed to see for yourself, Rosemary said, sitting beside him. You needed to understand that not everyone has good intentions. But you also needed to learn that not all distrust is justified. Claire never wanted anything from me, Nathaniel said quietly, and I treated her like she was the same as people like Marcus. Yes, you did, Rosemary agreed, and now she's gone. Nathaniel looked at his mother, the pain evident in his eyes. How do I fix this? Rosemary held her son's face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. You go to Chicago, you knock on her door, and you beg for forgiveness. Without pride, without excuses, just raw honesty. What if she doesn't forgive me? Then you accept it, Rosemary said simply. But at least you tried. At least you fought. And sometimes, son, fighting is already half the victory. Nathaniel nodded, determination finally replacing doubt. He stood up, kissed his mother's forehead, and left. Rosemary remained alone in the meeting room, looking out the window at the city below. Don't mess it up this time, she murmured to herself. And then she picked up her phone and called Frank. He's going after her, Rosemary said when Frank answered. On the other end of the line, Frank gave a hoarse laugh. About time. That boy is slower than frozen molasses. Will you give him the cousin's address? Only if he deserves it, Frank said. I'm going to test him first. Frank, you're very shrewd. Thank you. I take it as a compliment. Rosemary laughed and hung up. In Chicago, Claire was sitting in her cousin's tiny apartment, looking out the window at the rain that was starting to fall, and wondering if it would ever stop hurting. The rain in Chicago was different from Madison's, but equally relentless. Claire was looking out the window of her cousin's tiny apartment when the doorbell rang. It was 8 o'clock on a Friday night, and she definitely wasn't expecting visitors. I'll get it, her cousin Jessica shouted from the kitchen. Claire heard the door open, and then a strange silence. Claire? Jessica called, with a tone that mixed surprise and amusement. There's a wet billionaire at the door wanting to talk to you. Claire froze. No, it couldn't be. She walked to the door and felt her heart stop. Nathaniel Caldwell was standing in the cramped hallway of the building, completely soaked by the rain, hair stuck to his forehead, wearing jeans and a leather jacket that dripped water on the cheap linoleum floor. He looked completely out of place, and completely desperate. Hi, he said, his voice hoarse. Claire was speechless. Jessica looked between the two and then gave a huge smile. Okay, I'm going. Anywhere that's not here, she said, grabbing her purse and practically running down the stairs. Claire and Nathaniel were alone. How did you find me? Claire finally asked. Frank? Nathaniel admitted. But he only gave me the address after making me promise I wouldn't mess up again. And he threatened to hit me with a spatula if I made you cry. Despite everything, Claire felt her lips curve slightly. That sounds exactly like Frank. Can I come in? Nathaniel asked, or at least stop making a puddle in the hallway? Claire hesitated but stepped aside, letting him pass. Jessica's apartment was tiny. Living room, kitchen, and bedroom, all together, wasn't the size of Nathaniel's closet, but it was clean, cozy, and full of plants. Nathaniel stood in the middle of the room, dripping, visibly uncomfortable. Wait here, Claire said, going to the bathroom and coming back with a towel. You're soaked. I came straight from the airport, Nathaniel explained, drying his face. I didn't even stop to get a proper coat. Why? Because I needed to see you, he said simply, before it was too late. Claire crossed her arms, protecting herself. Nathaniel, let me talk, please, he cut her off. I rehearsed this the entire flight, and if I don't say it now, I'll forget everything. Claire nodded, leaning against the wall. Nathaniel took a deep breath. I ruined everything. Completely. You came into my life like this force of nature, genuine and real, and I panicked. Because in my world, nobody is genuine. Everyone wants something. And when Marcus started planting doubts, I let him. I let him because it was easier to believe in cynicism than to risk trusting. Claire remained silent, her eyes shining. But you never wanted anything from me, Nathaniel continued, his voice breaking. You took care of my mother during a storm without knowing who she was. You talked to me at the diner as if I were just a person. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, just Nathaniel. And that scared me, because it meant that if you rejected me, it would be real rejection of who I really am. A tear rolled down Claire's face, but she said nothing. I have no excuses, Nathaniel said. Just the truth. I was afraid to trust, afraid to get hurt, afraid that this was too good to be true. And in that fear, I hurt you. And I'm sorry. Really sorry." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain on the window. "Are you finished?" Claire finally asked, her voice trembling. "Yes." "Good," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, "because now it's my turn." Nathaniel swallowed hard, bracing himself. "You made me feel small," Claire said, each word deliberate. "Every time you canceled a meeting, every time you became distant, every silence told me I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong, and the worst part, I started to believe it." "Claire? No, you talked, now I talk," she cut him off. "I'm not rich. I don't have connections. I work at a diner serving coffee for $7 an hour plus tips, but I have dignity and worth, and I deserve to be treated better than I was." "You deserved it," Nathaniel agreed, his voice broken. "And I failed completely." Claire took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Why are you here, Nathaniel? Really?" "Because I love you," he said so simply that it took the air from her lungs. "And I had to lose you to realize it. I'm not asking you to forgive me now, or to trust me again. I'm just asking for a chance. A single chance to prove I can be better, that I can be the man you deserve." Claire looked at him for a long moment, and then asked the question that really mattered. "What about Marcus, and the work pressures, and all the people in your world who will question why you're with a waitress?" "Marcus was fired," Nathaniel said. "My mother completely exposed him. And as for the rest, to hell with them, all of them. Because none of that matters if I don't have you. You can't just say these things and expect that." "I know," Nathaniel interrupted her. "I know words aren't enough, so I'll prove it. With time, with actions, with everything I have, just give me the chance." Claire closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. When she opened them again, there was a tired determination in them. "If we do this, we have to do it right. No games, no masks, no you running away when things get difficult." "No running away," Nathaniel promised. "And I keep my life, my job, my friends, my independence. I'm not going to be an accessory in your world. I would never ask that. And you need to trust me, really, because if you doubt me again, if you make me feel like this again, it's over. Forever." "I trust you," Nathaniel said firmly, "and I'll spend every day proving it." Claire studied him for one more endless moment, and then finally took a small step forward. "Okay? Okay?" Nathaniel repeated, barely believing it. "Okay, let's try," Claire said. "Slowly, one day at a time. And if you mess up, I'll fix it," Nathaniel promised, "or die trying." And then, for the first time in weeks, Claire smiled. Really smiled. "You're being dramatic." "I'm in love," Nathaniel corrected. "It comes with the package," Claire laughed, and the sound was like music. Nathaniel took a step forward, hesitant. "Can I hug you? Or is it too soon?" "You're dripping on the floor," Claire pointed out. "Is that a no?" "That's an observation," Claire said, but opened her arms. Nathaniel pulled her into a tight hug, not caring that he was wet, not caring about anything except the fact that she was there, giving him another chance. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Don't make me regret it," Claire whispered back. "Never." 3 weeks later, Claire was at the diner when Rosemary came in with a smile that could light up an entire city. "So," Rosemary said, sitting at the counter, "I heard my son is officially dating." Claire felt her face heat up. "Does he tell you everything?" "Dear, I'm his mother. I know everything," Rosemary said, taking the coffee mug Claire poured. "And I'm absolutely delighted." Frank appeared from the kitchen. "Great, now we're going to have a billionaire here every week." "Frank, be nice," Claire said, but she was smiling. "I'm always nice," Frank retorted. "I just said he has to pay the bill like everyone else." "I completely agree," Nathaniel said, coming in and making Claire jump in surprise. She hadn't heard the doorbells. He kissed her quickly, casual and natural, as if they had done it 1,000 times. "Hi," he said, smiling. "Hi," Claire replied, feeling butterflies in her stomach. "Okay, this is too sweet for me," Frank grumbled. "I'm going to the kitchen before I develop diabetes," Rosemary laughed. "Frank, you're a secret romantic." "I'm nothing of the sort. I'm a realist who accepts that sometimes good things happen," he said, but he was smiling. Nathaniel sat next to his mother, completely comfortable in the simple diner environment. In the following months, they built something real. Nathaniel learned to turn off his phone during dates. Claire learned to accept help when she needed it. Rosemary became a constant presence, creating hilarious situations by trying to force romantic moments. And Frank? Frank continued being Frank, making sarcastic comments, but always having a cup of coffee ready when they needed it. It wasn't perfect. They had arguments, difficult moments, complicated adjustments, but it was real. The following spring, while Claire served coffee and Nathaniel worked on his laptop at a corner table, Rosemary looked out the window and smiled. The storm had passed long ago, but what it left behind was worth every second of rain. This was the story of Claire and Nathaniel. If you believe that kindness always brings rewards, comment the word destiny down below. I really want to know your opinion. What did you think of Nathaniel's decision to go after Claire in Chicago? Leave your comment, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next story.